Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. And this is not really an episode, not really anything specific. It's in fact a wrap. So we have finished the first season for the podcast now. So I thought I'd do a very quick sort of outro bit where we talk about sort of what's happened throughout the series, some of the things we've talked about, and just say a lot of very big thank yous to people. So firstly, a huge thanks to Rob Mantandon, who has been with me since the beginning, behind the camera for all of the episodes, and has suffered not only watching all of the episodes in real time, but then consistently watching them over and over and over again as he goes through and edits them. So a huge thank you to Rob for everything he's done and his time helping with the podcast. And I'm looking away at Rob now, who's still there supporting me behind the camera. And you know, also he's travelled the length and breadth of the country, been stuck in poor weather with an umbrella or getting wet while I've been sort of hidden somewhere talking perhaps. So a big thank you to you, massive thanks for your time and help with everything, really, really appreciate it. It wouldn't have been what it is without you. And then of course, a big thank you to all of the guests we've had on as well, on all the various episodes. So I thought I'd talk a little bit and say thanks to everybody about some of the things we've talked about. So if you haven't seen the whole season, which I imagine a lot of people haven't, you might have watched a bit of an episode here and there, or the odd episode, or maybe you've just joined us. So it might be interesting to hear a little bit of what we talked about from the various guests. So you can go back and see some of those episodes. So firstly, we had John Little on, where we talked about how do we design complexity into the natural environment. And John's got thousands of fantastic little sort of quips and comments and ideas. And also we walk around and see his amazing garden, all the really cool stuff he's doing to really add ecological value beyond just, you know, creating a patch of wildflowers. What more can you do? How do you actually design complexity into what you're doing? Really fantastic episode if you're involved in the design of anything, or if you just own a garden. Really, really great. And one of my favorite things that he says really is, you know, imagine a shopping trolley in a pond, you know, abhorrent to anyone that sees it, but actually that creates almost like an artificial reef. It adds complexity to that environment, which brings ecological value. So how do you take those principles and apply them on a bigger scale to bring ecology into the solutions we're creating? How do we take that principle and make it and beautify it, but also add and embed greater biodiversity value in what we're doing? So really fantastic episode. I think it's the most viewed episode we have, and we've had so many amazing comments from people as well. So a big thank you to John for that episode. Then we had Dan Stewart, my former head boy from school, on talking about carbon utilization. He's gone on to do some really amazing things. Congrats to Dan for all that he's doing with his company and the amount of staff he's hired. Every time I go on LinkedIn, he seems to have more staff. So they're doing amazing work in sort of catching carbon from waste processes and putting it back into chemical processes and making use of it. A brand new sort of chemical process they've developed. Really, really interesting. So check that out and find them on LinkedIn. Then we had George Hassel on, where we talked about gardening for the future. So George is, I don't know the best way to describe George, incredible young man. He just had finished school and was going to college when he came on, and he talked about, you know, how do we engage young people with the environment and what's the importance of gardening for people and the sort of social side of it and the impact you know, we can have. It's our patch. Everybody has their own bit of land typically, unless you live in a flat perhaps, but even then you've got a balcony and some indoor plants and things. So what can you do? How can you get involved, and how can you sort of get as much of the natural world as close to you as you can, and how can we sort of improve things? Then we had Merrick Denton Thompson, a very good friend of mine, on. So where we talked about sort of landscapes and farming. So again, you know, all the episodes really are very interesting. But for me, this one's a particular interest as well, because it's all about landscape architecture and farming, and how do we look at the character of our landscapes and use that as a guiding principle to regenerate them. And Merrick's doing loads of amazing work now on sort of the future of farming. He sort of set up landscape character areas, so if you're a landscape architect, it's going to be a particular interest for you there. And really, we talk a lot about how that can form the basis of moving forward. And really, when you start looking at things like biodiversity net gain, regenerative farming, really what Merrick's doing needs to be the basis of that. So a really interesting episode, really, really worth checking out. Then we talked about community and the environment with Judy Ling Wong. So Judy, fantastic lady. We talk a lot about how to engage different communities, disadvantaged groups, the importance of engagement and the role it can have, and how, you know, there's a lot of talk around sort of climate justice and all of this thing, and how do we move forward and not leave anyone behind. So Judy's doing a lot of work in that area. She's now also doing a huge amount of work on green jobs. So I still keep in touch with a lot of the people from the podcast. So she sort of spearheading the green jobs mandate from the government. She's doing a lot of work on sort of how do we engage different communities, what are the green jobs of the future, how do we encourage people into them. It's a lot more than just your typical environmental jobs, so something really worth exploring and following there. She's also been doing some work on Sky News's, I think it's Climate Hour. She's one of the regular guests on that, so if you haven't seen that, that's worth checking out too. I think it's called the Sky News Climate Hour anyway, but Sky News, talking about environment, Judy's often on there, worth looking at. Ted Green and Jill Butler were the next episode that we had, where we talked about ancient trees, rewilding, and all sorts of amazing environmental projects. So if you're interested in sort of the history of the UK and our landscape, this is a really interesting one for you. But also we talk a lot about our ancient trees, how the landscape sort of came to be, how actually it probably wasn't one big dense dark wood. I mean, maybe it was at one point in time, but that probably isn't the way nature would have intended. A lot of people think the UK was this great vast forest, and actually it really probably wasn't. And there's more and more evidence from all sorts of different people, including some of our other guests like Merrick, who I've already mentioned, and the work he's doing that sort of indicate that actually even the best carbon sequestration isn't forest. It's a sort of a much more diverse range of sort of treatments, sort of more open pasture with a mix of trees. So very, very interesting episode. They talk about a lot of the amazing rewilding projects that they help kickstart, like the NEP project here in the UK. Then we had an episode on worms, something very, very specific with Ana de la Vega. Really interesting in the role that worms have, not just in the environment itself, but also in terms of wormoponics for improving aquaponic and hydroponic systems. It's a new version of that, and all the amazing things that they can do, and how she's using them with community projects and things too. Then we had Dusty Gedge on, Greening the Skyline, where we looked at green roofs, urban greening, how do we get more greenery into the city, how do we rethink greening the city itself. We also walk around a really fantastic rooftop in London there, which is a really interesting one to see near St. Paul's. Then we had the By4 experiment on with Emma and Rob, where they're changing the atmosphere of an area of forest, I think in Shropshire, not just outside Birmingham. And what they're doing there is looking at how the climate is predicted to be, whatever outcome we have in about 2050. And seeing how plants and things respond to that. But also, it's a good, interesting discussion about trees in general and how you can sort of do projects in woods without having a major impact on them. Staying on the topic of wood, we have Dougal Driver, where we talk all about wood itself, the amazing applications for it. One of the really interesting things from that episode that I found is that actually we can use wood for so many new things like LCD screens, various bits of technology are being used for it, such as satellites, pieces of cars, insulation, all these cool things, and sort of how do we encourage better uptake of wood use and production and the whole sort of life cycle of it and industry surrounding it across the UK. So very interesting episode, a very important one. Dougal's doing a huge amount of work leading on a timber production and management across the UK. In fact, he works with Grown in Britain, and that's their whole purpose. So fantastic company and organisation there. Then we had the Eden Project on, where we talked about a range of different projects, from their new major geothermal project, which has a huge opportunity to produce a massive amount of energy for people across the UK. And Cornwall's got a huge reserve of potential geothermal energy underneath it, which could revitalise its economy and also, build a whole new technology process. Then we also talked to the CEO of Eden International about all their international work, all the Edens that are popping up all over the world to help spread the message and educate people and encourage people to be involved in the environment. And then, of course, we talked with Fern all about wildflowers and the challenges facing actually even ecological restoration projects, where when the harvesting methods we're using are changing the genetic makeup of the plants that we're trying to spread. So much so that people going out to ID plants actually can't ID them because the genetic makeup has changed so much. So that's a really interesting episode about wildflowers and the work being done to preserve genetic diversity and also encourage, a better mix and recovery of the environment. Got to take a breather. Edge Urban Design. Funnily enough, talking about urban design, really interesting episode in the work they're doing of how to create better communities, how can we design settlements better, what challenges do we have when it comes to designing settlements. For instance, why do we keep building urban edge extensions which are completely disconnected, then sticking another one on the other side of it, so we're creating lots of sort of disconnected communities and things, and how that's not necessarily being addressed in the best way, but actually how do we plan for that better? How do we think in the future about how to design new spaces and new urban areas much more effectively? Then we had Tim Hopkins talking about data-driven future farms. So how do we use big data to inform farms? And Tim's doing some amazing work. He's embedding lots of things into the process around sort of nutrient neutrality, biodiversity net gain, all of those things to be able to help inform farmers, not only make decisions quicker, but also in a much more educated and informed way to build forward, basically, build a much better farming system, because frankly it's dysfunctional at the moment, and there's a lot of work from him, people like Merrick, doing things to really sort of take farming into the future and hopefully set the government straight. Jonathan Porritt talking about his book A Hope in Hell, possibly the best book that I've read in a long time to do with the environment. I say the environment because we've had a lot of people on talking about very specific things, which we'll come into in a moment. But actually, Jonathan Porritt's book, compared to things like Bill Gates' book and things like that, is by far the best overview of the environment that I've read. Terrifying statistics and stuff in there, but also fantastic positive opportunities too around energy use, how we can do things differently. Very inspiring, very interesting. Really recommend reading that book. Fantastic. And check out the episode because it's truly very interesting. Then we had one of our fantastic sponsors on, Chris Griffiths from Marshalls, where we talked about green manufacturing and the challenges around sustainability. And he pointed out there's a real juxtaposition when we start to look at things like sustainability, because recycling materials typically uses a lot more carbon. So how do you look at sustainability? Because if you look at purely carbon, it's a very narrow lens. That's something that comes up with Tapiwa's episode as well, where actually quite often when we look at carbon, we miss out other things like biodiversity or water. So really a lot of very interesting sort of topics raised there. Then we talk with Alistair Driver from Rewilding Britain, where we talk about the big rewilding projects and the sort of challenges and issues sort of associated with them. How do we deliver big rewilding projects? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And bringing back beasts, what beasts are likely to return to our shores soon, or perhaps not so soon. Sophie Beasley, where we actually talk quite a lot about me, which may not be of so much of interest to some of you, but that episode really talks a lot about the importance of engaging youth and how when I was a not so engaged young person, how she sort of got me involved with the environment and ultimately ended up here and doing the various things that I'm doing. Then we had Dave Golson on, talking about his book, Silent Earth. Really, another really fantastic read about the challenges facing biodiversity, insects, nature generally, and some really terrifying stuff in there. I mean, you've really got to read this book to understand the damage that pesticides are having on us and the environment. For instance, there was I think not in the book, but in the episode, he mentions about a study in Switzerland where 100% of kids tested have been found to have neonicotinoids in their spinal fluid. And a neonicotinoid is an insecticide, and it's a neurotoxin. So incredibly worrying that is being found there. So along with many other things that are just really quite shocking, but it's really worth knowing about and understanding the situation sort of arising there. God, when you start reading this list, you realise actually how many episodes we've done. And poor Rob's standing there looking at me going, oh, this list is going on for ages. But it just shows how many amazing people we've had on and the amazing things that everybody's done. So then we had Reed and Simmons on, talking about farming sustainability and food, packaging, how we sort of need to change mindsets and our approach to farming generally. Then we had Marion Boswell on, talking about sustainable garden design, where this was really interesting. And there's one thing there's a lot of things I really like from all of the episodes, of course, but one thing I found really interesting from Marion's episode was how simple things not only save you time, but also can really improve biodiversity. And where we're sat filming, we're sort of sat on the edge of a lawn spiral where she's sort of mown in a spiral, but left sort of in between each ring of the spiral space for wildflowers, which creates a really interesting range of habitats and also lots of biodiversity. And she said, it's very simple. If you think about an older person that's got a garden or someone that's not really using their lawn very much, why do we keep a lawn, really? Okay, it looks nice. Maybe it's a bit of a status thing perhaps for some people, but actually we could do so much more with it. It could be so much more interesting. And actually mowing that spiral means you're mowing about half as much land you're giving about half as much land over to biodiversity, which means it takes half as much time to do it. That's half as much fuel, half as much energy. So actually doing that is a really beneficial thing to do for you and for the planet as well. Then we had Oliver Jones on talking about sustainability generally. So that's a really interesting episode. Oliver is also a podcast host. So it's quite interesting for us to sort of compare notes about all the interesting things we've sort of covered in the various podcasts, new technologies, challenges, opportunities, interesting stuff. Luckily done some really interesting projects with Oliver as well now on various things where we're looking at sustainability. So super interesting episode there. Will Campion, where we talk about his amazing new build homes. Also, I'm luckily doing some projects with Will now as well. So it's one of the great things about the podcast, you know, it was never just to go and talk to people about what they're doing. We want to try and get involved, connect people up, introduce people to one another, like Tim and Merrick is another example. They're doing a lot of work together now as well, thanks to the podcast essentially. So Will's done some amazing stuff, super sustainable new homes. We actually go and look around one of the homes in the second half of the episode where you get to see what he's done. He's using all new technologies to build homes. And the new homes to the standard he's building can be heated by the body heat of 2 people, or at least that's the principle. So they're super sustainable, really interesting to look at, and just frankly beautiful homes, and affordable as well. That's the other thing. He's building these amazing homes, but it's actually a really affordable way to build. So it makes you think, why aren't more people doing that? Then we had another one of our fantastic sponsors come on, Markita from Vectorworks, talking about the role of design and technology in sustainability. So very interesting here, because the way we use technology is changing. As you start to design, whatever it may be, a landscape, a building or whatever, using technology, you can now understand the material requirements, quantities, all of these things, carbon impacts, energy efficiency, and you can just see all of that from the beginning, biodiversity net gain, all of this stuff, and make sure that that's being considered and maximised throughout the project. What happens if we do this compared to that? Does it reduce the amount of materials? Does it mean we're recycling more? Does it mean the energy efficiency is better? All of that stuff. So that's really important and really interesting, and it just demonstrates the vital role of technology. Then we had David Priest-Jones on talking about HS2 and sustainable infrastructure and the challenges around embedding biodiversity and delivering a major infrastructure project, the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, or at least it was until the government sort of started looking at canning another part of it, which is completely moronic in my view. But very interesting project, what they're doing, and they're doing a lot of very innovative stuff as well around biodiversity and how do we mitigate the impacts when you have to put a major rail line through sort of natural system. Ted Green talking about his book Tree Time, super interesting. We had Ted, I've already mentioned Ted of course, he's the only person that came on twice, talking about his new book and his life. Ted's had a huge role and impact in the environmental world generally. Amazing guy, super interesting, and really worth checking out, and really worth getting the book actually, because if you're interested in sort of studying or a PhD or interested in trying to find a niche, then he lists a huge amount of opportunities or areas that are just not really being researched or looked at. So fantastic opportunity there. Then we had Ramon talking about algae and all the applications for that. Super interesting again. Algae is sort of one of those wonder materials of the future, so really worth checking out. I won't talk too much about the last couple because hopefully you've just seen them because they're the ones that were released most recently. And then Ben Harrison, where we're talking about the retrofit home, which is the most sustainable retrofit project in the UK, one that I was involved with, where we talk about sort of water efficiency and things there. So that's not a very quick, very sort of long rundown of all the various people we've had on, but just to demonstrate, how interesting and how diverse the sort of topics we've had on have been. So what's next for the podcast? Well, at the moment, we're not sure. If you've watched the series and you like it and you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it to other people, because the more interest we get, the more subscribers we get, the more likely and probable it is and more support we'll get for doing something else. We are very interested in doing another series, but we haven't got any plans to do that at the moment. So it's something we are definitely considering and looking at. But at the moment, that's it for now. So I hope you've enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, of course. And I guess we'll keep you in the loop. We might do some more sort of little clips of various projects and things that I'm involved with, and as I sort of meet up with previous guests and things over time, and sort of catching up on what they're doing now. And then I guess just a final thank you to Rob for all of his support, for NDLA, who have given me lots of time to come and and supported me in doing all of this series. That's ND Landscape Architects. And then a big thank you to our sponsors throughout the series, so Vectorworks, who have been a huge supporter of us throughout the series, and Marshalls. Thanks to both of those who actually, if it wasn't for their support, we wouldn't have had these extra episodes. Originally the series was only supposed to be 25, but we got some additional episodes in, thanks to them. LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn offered for us to go on their Creator Accelerator program and gave us some support and things from that too. And then of course Water Offsets as well for helping sponsor us. Then we had Gillian Goodson Design and the Botanical Gardens in Birmingham, who also, Gillian really supported us and helped getting things going, introducing us to people to come on the series. A massive thank you to her, and a huge thanks to the Botanical Gardens for letting us film there. Really, really grateful, really, really useful. We filmed a huge amount of episodes there, so huge thanks for that, because actually finding locations to film is incredibly challenging. And then thank you to all of you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. So hopefully see you again soon. And yeah, please like and subscribe. Follow us on different social medias. We're on pretty much every social media. If you're not following us on them, please do, just to give us a bit of a boost. And fingers crossed, and hopefully we see you again soon. So many thanks.